Hello and welcome to the Policy Insight for the month of March. I'm happy that we have here David Heron from Pay.uk. David is Head of Standards at Pay.uk. And I wanted to ask him why standards are important in data, in payments. And David, can you share with us some comments on your role?
Yes, of course. And thank you very much for having me. I think data standardization tends to have a bit of a common misconception. I think standards generally are kind of seen as something that's written down and filed away and put in a library, and people kind of commonly reference them. But no one really kind of knows what they're about. And the key thing about data standards, certainly with what we do at Pay.uk, is about enabling data transfer. So Pay.uk is the operator of Bacs, faster payments, cheque clearing, confirmation of pay, and many other services. And we're also building the new payments architecture, the MPA, which is the future retail UK payments infrastructure. But beside that, we're also a mandated standard setter and rule setter for the infrastructure that we set. And so what that means is that our regulators have mandated that we set standards, technical messaging standards for that infrastructure. Now, boil that down, that's basically saying, well, yes, as part of a payment, you would send information. But unless that information is clearly structured and formatted and its specific usage is defined, what ends up happening in an unregulated, and I use that in a very loose sense, an unregulated or uncontrolled environment, is that data is just sent everywhere and it's unmanageable, and people don't really know what to do with it. So our role really is to define specifically what is the data that should be sent for a specific service, and that can differ between Bacs and confirmation of pay, for example. How should it be structured? So what is the format? If you think about if I have an Excel spreadsheet and I send you a list of dates, if they're not in the date format, that's not really manageable for you. So it's understanding what is the format and structure that should be sent. And then it's probably most importantly, I've found, is it's defining the specific usage. And one of the work streams that I can certainly go into a little bit later on if needed, that we're working on, has come up with a field, for example, around age of account or customer relationship. Now, what does that mean? That might mean if you opened up an account many years ago with a bank just for a mortgage, it might mean you've been a customer for 20 years. But if you've only had a current account for 1 year, that is quite different. And so defining the specific usage of a data field is almost the most important piece of that. So it's really defining the structure, the format of which data should be sent, and it's defining that usage. And the whole point about this is that we're just the enabler, right? It's trying to get to a world where actually people can do something with that data rather than mucking about, trying to format it, trying to go back and understand how did you mean it when you sent it. It's just providing that enabler so that people can get on and use the data for whatever process they need.
And how well are the players? I mean, what is the state of play of this? Like, are you just at the start, or are you in the middle, or are you near the conclusion? Where are we? What do we need to do to get there?
It's a good question, but it depends upon which service you're talking about. For our current services like Bacs and faster payments, we've been running data standards for many, many years. Bacs runs off a standard called Standard 18, which has a series of defined fields, and within those, the specific usage of those fields. But if you think about the new payments architecture, the MPA, that is the journey that we're on right now. We've recently put out mandatory data that will be required in the NPA. But beyond the NPA, this is about a new standard, an ISO 20022 standard, which in short is simply about increasing the improvement of the quality and the quantity of data that can be sent in a payment message. So we're now thinking beyond simply clearing and settlement to a world where businesses, corporates, personal customers can start using that additional data. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about things like remittance data, things like purpose codes, things like structured addresses, right, which help the processing of information beyond clearing and settlement for banks, businesses, corporates, etc. But it's doing it in a way that's quite progressive. And we work very closely with the Bank of England as operator of CHAPS, and we also liaise very closely with a number of financial market infrastructures across the world, and they all have the same challenges with respect to introducing this new standard and these new data challenges themselves. So where are we? Current services been embedded for many years, and we constantly review and maintain the standard to make sure they're fit for purpose for those current services. But for the MPA, we're on that journey right now, and it's working out what works best for people. That envisages a world where increased quality and quantity of data can be exchanged seamlessly. And that also links into some of the cross-border work that's been done at the FSB level as well.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, are these standards just domestic or they are international? And how the domestic ones play with the, you know, when we have to do cross-border transactions?
Yeah. So the standard for the MPA, the ISO 20022 standard, is a financial transaction messaging standard, right? And that is a global standard. It's been rolled out across several jurisdictions already. The key bit is that how do you distill that standard to make it appropriate for UK retail payments? And that's what my team does. And so it's engaging with a number of banks and different stakeholders. And I use the word banks loosely. I'm actually talking about any financial institution that will connect to the MPA to send messages. It's working with the Bank of England as operator of CHAPS. It's also working with entities like open banking. I know there's a lot of discussion right now around the future entity and what might happen there, but it's connecting to open banking standards as well is important to ensure that real end-to-end process can be enabled. So yes, it's an international standard, but it's been tweaked and amended to ensure it is appropriate for UK payments. So that yes, ultimately we get to a world where we are pushing for cross-border payments and making sure that they are as seamless as possible. What I would pull out is that you can have a harmonized standard, a standard that aligns with other implementations across the globe. But fundamentally, this is also driven by rules and how jurisdictions implement these. And for example, what data they decide is mandatory above and beyond what ISO has asked for is an interesting one as well. And that in itself could present itself obstacles that we'll need to navigate through as we think about cross-border payments and that move towards frictionless payments.
Thank you very much, David. Very, very interesting and also complicated subject because it's quite technical. So not of immediate understanding maybe for everyone, but it's definitely worth thinking strategically about these things. So what's your call for our members? What the message that you want to send to our membership?
Well, probably a couple of things just come to mind. The first is really have a look. What works for your businesses and your clients? What data do they need? Now, there is a balance between, providing too much data that actually there is a burden to managing that data. And I'm talking about in terms of, having the right architecture, there's GDPR considerations, etc., that sort of stuff, and the legal requirements, I guess, associated with data. But it's also saying what data would make my customers' lives easier. Now, that could range from a whole range of things, from remittance data, so invoicing data. It could be tax information. It could be purpose codes to help highlight, for example, vulnerable customers. So there's a whole range of different types, as you could sort of say, different types of data that help, I guess, kind of ordinary people in their businesses and their personal lives. For example, another example just at the top of my head right now is clarity of bank statements. If I think about some of my bank statements that come through, where sometimes I'm not sure what the payment is, and that's probably because there's either a reference number I don't recognize, or the name of the beneficiary tends to be a parent company for which I have no idea who that is. So it's all of these things, from personal customers to corporates to businesses to straight through processing to fraud enhancement to accounts reconciliation. So my call is, go and see what we're producing between Pay.uk and the Bank of England, and what other other jurisdictions have implemented as well, and familiarize yourself with kind of not necessarily what is ISO 20022, but what could you benefit from with the increased quality and quantity of data. And then the second point I would say is, if you're interested in having a conversation with us, then contact us, because we are about driving about this standard. The reason why we're going to ISO 20022 fundamentally is because we all want to have improved quality and quantity of data, and understanding who will benefit from those, and getting those people who will benefit to drive this so that we can enable the data is key. So yeah, reach out to us, speak to us, and we can start those kind of conversations. It's, for us, it's key about evidencing demand and support for what we're doing. If we don't hear from people, then we will assume that actually maybe the demand isn't that kind of great, but we think it probably is. But we need to have that evidence, and people contact us, letting us know that they would benefit from us and they are keen to work with us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much once again for your time and giving us all of this precious focus on what standards and data standards in payments are. And speak soon. I'm sure that someone will be in touch with you, and if not, we will ensure that someone will be.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good.